What's going on, guys? Jordan Richards here from Destination Devy, and I'm here to present to you your Dynasty Stock Watch for Week 8 on Mayo Media Network. If you're not subscribed to Mayo Media Network already, please subscribe, drop this video a like if you like this video, and comment below who your favorite buy is in Dynasty right now as we head into about the midway point of the season. Now, this week was filled with a lot of ups and downs, and obviously, like we've seen from this season a lot, the main story is injuries, seeing the ACL injury to Odell Beckham Jr., Chris Carson dealing with an injury, Kenyon Drake dealing with a high ankle sprain. There's been a lot of different injury situations, and I just wanted to kind of briefly mention that in case somebody missed it along the news week. But going forward, obviously there's still stipulations that are going to change for these running backs, for these wide receivers, and I'll probably touch on those at the end of this video of a few guys I want to talk about beyond my kind of main segment where I give you 3 players that I feel are either going up or down. I wanted to start first off with Mike Evans, wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And he's a very difficult wide receiver to project, and he was honestly a guy who was falling in Dynasty and in redraft heading into the pre-draft process. And the reason why is because Tom Brady doesn't like to throw downfield. He doesn't like these big body receivers. He doesn't like this. He doesn't like that. And at the beginning of the season, we were wrong. A lot of people were wrong. They weren't really seeing it for what it was. Mike Evans is still a touchdown threat. He still getting the volume. But I think we're starting to see a changing of the guard now where he's not going to get the ball simply because he's Mike Evans. That's not how this is going to work. Tom Brady doesn't operate that way. We've seen what he's done with Scotty Miller. We've seen how Gronk has slowly got more and more involved in the offense. And obviously with Chris Godwin coming back into the lineup, it's another weapon for Tom Brady to use at his disposal. And it meant that Mike Evans wasn't targeted last game. Whether it was the Raiders were keying in on him or he just wasn't getting open, for some reason, Tom Brady didn't throw him the ball. He only saw 2 targets, which he caught both of, and he got 37 yards, which is a dud for fantasy because we don't draft Mike Evans for him to put up 5-6 fantasy points a week. We draft him to be that 80 receiving yards, potentially a touchdown, hopefully see 8 to 10 targets a game, and that's just simply not going to happen. Now, news broke this morning that Chris Godwin broke his finger, and so he's probably not going to play Monday night against the Giants. And so what I would say to people who own Mike Evans is, first off, I'd be trying to sell him if I can. He's still a very good name value. He has a lot of name value, and while he hasn't been the best performer, I do fully expect him to ball out against the Giants on Monday night. He could easily see 2 touchdowns. There's not going to be as much target competition with Chris Godwin out, with Antonio Brown not playing, and there really just be Gronk and Scotty Miller as kind of the 2 main guys. We may see some Justin Watson, we may see some Tyler Johnson as another 2 guys to kind of mention, but I fully expect them to kind of get Mike Evans back involved, and that will provide you potential opportunity to sell Mike Evans. The true reality is that he's not the best separator, and those are the kind of guys that Tom Brady likes to throw to. He likes to throw to guys who separate really, really well. That's why we've seen him throw the ball so much to Scotty Miller. That's why we've seen him throw the ball to Tyler Johnson, who is an extremely productive athlete at Minnesota. Coming in as a rookie, he's a 5th-round pick, but if he can get open, Tom Brady's going to throw him the ball, and we saw that against the Bears a few weeks ago when he had a great game. Of course, the other X factor is obviously Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's going to be back probably against the Saints, so we may see Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown come back, arguably one of the best receivers of all time. And what exactly does that mean for Mike Evans? It probably means that it's going to be a wide receiver by committee, as crazy as that sounds, because it's not going to be, 10 targets to Chris Godwin, 10 targets to Antonio Brown, 10 targets to Mike Evans, 8 targets to Gronk. That's not possible. There's no way that's going to happen. And that's not factoring in this week Leonard Fournette getting 7 targets. So it's going to be very difficult, honestly, for all players who are on the Bucs, starting them week to week in Dynasty or in redraft. It's going to be kind of a matchup-based approach. You're going to want to do a lot of research on these matchups because ultimately that's what's going to decide how this offense is going to run week to week. It's like that Belichick style. Obviously, Brady is the same type of way. He's going to find a few players to key in on each week, and he's going to attack them over and over and over and over and over. And if Mike Evans doesn't have that favorable matchup, then he's not going to get the target. It's really just as simple as that. Brady is a very smart, cerebral quarterback. He's going to use the players who are struggling, the players who have the advantage to his advantage when he's throwing the ball. And if that means Mike Evans isn't going to get targets, then so be it. It's not going to matter to him. The truth is that Mike Evans is going to be a little bit harder to own. In my opinion, the only 2 safe guys that I really trust are Chris Godwin when he's healthy, and honestly, Rob Gronkowski. Rob Gronkowski's been really good so far in the past couple weeks, and he's really showing his involvement in the offense. He found the end zone again, which is great. Like I said, I wanted to kind of get a week ahead of this. I figured he'd probably have another decent game against the Giants, potentially even a great game. So I wanted to mention it to you guys now so you have a chance to sell him if he does have a great game. And if you can get him for a good price this week, I would be considering it because he's still a highly priced asset, but I do think that his production is on the decline for this season and potentially next season if Brady stays and the offense kind of stays the same. The other obviously decliner is Rojo, who saw a lower snap share than Leonard Fournette in Leonard Fournette's first week back, and so that may be a bit of a changing of the guards too. So you think about all these weapons coming into play, and it may just mean that Mike Evans is just not going to be the guy we hoped he could be playing with Tom Brady this season. Now, the second guy I wanted to touch on is Chase Edmonds, running back for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, the Cardinals are on bye this week, so there may be a potential opportunity to buy Edmonds, but most savvy owners know that Edmonds is going to be the guy. It's already been reports coming out that he's going to be the guy coming out of the break. And it's honestly really good for Edmonds because he hasn't been the feature guy, but he's going to get that extra week to kind of just learn and tweak things and just make sure that he knows all the plays and all that. So when he does come and be the feature guy again, he's going to be ready to go. It's still his second year in this offense, so I'm sure there's a few things that he may need to clean up a little bit, but we've seen his involvement in the passing game, which has been excellent. We saw what he did on Sunday Night Football against the Seattle Seahawks, and he had a great game when Kenyon Drake went out. He was running the ball really effectively. He was catching passes out of the backfield, and he really could be an RB1, potentially more likely an RB2, depending on his touchdown upside goes. But knowing that he's going to be involved in the receiving work, and he's going to be involved in the rushing game now with Kenyon Drake going down, it bodes really well for his value going forward. And he already was probably one of the top handcuffs in fantasy, especially with how much Kenyon Drake was struggling, as I told you guys last week, to sell him and to try and sell him. Now, unfortunately, that window's a little bit closed because he got hurt. But Chase Edmonds, if you do own him, you have to hold him. You have to ride that ship out. Unless you want to try and ship him off for a first-round pick, second-round pick, whatever it may be, I would go for at least a first if I could, especially if I'm on a non-contending roster. So you ship him off for a first, get that draft capital back because he should be great. There's no reason why you should sell him for any less than that. And I love Chase Edmonds. He's one of my most owned players in Dynasty and in fantasy football, period, because of what he can do despite his limited volume. He's been, an RB3 basically, while seeing, believe an under 40% snap share, which is still pretty good, even as a backup running back. But now we should see him in that 60-70% snap share, getting way more touches than he was before. And another guy to just note is Eno Benjamin, the running back out of Arizona State. The Cardinals drafted him, I believe, in the 6th or 7th round. So he's not a very high draft capital guy, but he's been in the system for the whole year. So hopefully we may see a little bit of Eno, who is a fairly productive running back in college. People thought he could even be a first, second round running back. But in his final year and his testing, he didn't do as well as we hoped. So he slipped quite a bit. But there's still that opportunity now, and that was someone who I was buying on taxi squads and some of my late round selections in rookie drafts as a guy who maybe could be something. And the thing about Chase Edmonds that we need to remember is that if Drake doesn't do anything and he doesn't really come back and they kind of give him the David Johnson treatment, why can't he be the starting running back next year? So if you're a guy who doesn't own Chase Edmonds right now and you want to go and acquire him, I don't think it's the worst idea because I believe he still has a year or two on his contract. And that bodes really well for his future fantasy value as well. And we've already heard Cliff Kingsbury talk about how he is a running back 1. He can be a running back 1. He's their running back 1A or 1B behind Kenyon Drake, who's 1A. So he should be used like a feature back. And if he does become the feature back beyond this season, once they let Kenyon Drake go off his transition tag, I don't see that as an unrealistic possibility, especially with how well he's already performed. So I would go out and try and get Chase Edmonds for a reasonable price if you can, especially on a bye week. He may be easier to acquire than he will be in subsequent weeks after he has a couple of good games. And of course, still look at potentially getting Eno Benjamin because he may be involved and could be a sneaky player if anything were to happen to Chase Edmonds. Now, the last player I wanted to touch on is Mr. 3TD Tyler Lockett, who also went ballistic in this game. And I think it's really interesting to kind of see how this development came about because there's a lot of people who believe that DK Metcalf was the wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. And throughout the offseason, there was a lot of people kind of fading Tyler Lockett, not really sure what to do with him, assuming his target share would go down. But what we're seeing is it's more matchup based a little bit too. Tyler Lockett's still a very productive, very talented wide receiver in the NFL. And if that means we need to target him 20 times a game, that's what Seattle's going to do. They knew that matchup was one they could win. And in the previous year, DK Metcalf struggled a little bit against Patrick Peterson, which they already knew. So they knew Drake Kirkpatrick was beatable, and they went after him 20 times. Tyler Lockett saw 20 targets for 15 receptions, 200 yards, and 3 touchdowns, if you don't know already, and he completely balled. Now, the question is, what do you do with Tyler Lockett? Tyler Lockett is one of my favorite wide receivers, But the problem is his volume can be inconsistent. And when you have a boom week like this where you put up a ridiculous amount of fantasy points, it makes you a little bit overvalued in some respects. But I do think Tyler Lockett's still a weekly start. I don't know what you would want to buy him for, and that's really the tricky part with his stock and his value. Truth is that if Russ is going to throw at this rate, he's going to be able to sustain 2 wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2s for sure each and every week. And as long as Tyler Lockett sees the volume, he sees those 8 to 10 targets, maybe those 7 to 9 targets in some matchups, he's going to be a viable fantasy option. And whether that's going to be on limited volume or a lot of volume like we saw this week, he can get it done. He's a very talented wide receiver, especially in the open field. He can get deep. And as we've seen, he can score touchdowns, which is kind of the biggest knock on some of these route runners, is that they don't always do so well in the red zone like we've seen with Metcalf, where he's a much bigger body wide receiver, easier to get him the ball in those tight windows. Lockett's still able to maneuver his way in space and score touchdowns like we've seen, whether it's going deep, a little bit on shorter routes, or kind of that intermediate fashion. He's been able to get it done with ease, and we've seen that with 2-3 touchdown games from Lockett this year. So he's kind of been a bit of a boom guy, but he definitely hasn't busted, and that's why he's wide receiver 2 overall in fantasy right now, and I believe he's wide receiver 1 in points per game. Now, I don't necessarily expect that to continue, but obviously Lockett is still a tremendous talent and a tremendous player, and I expect him to keep cooking with Russ as one of those chefs in his kitchen. Now, I wanted to touch on a couple of injuries, just to kind of name drop a few guys. One guy that I wanted to mention is DJ Dallas, the running back for the Seattle Seahawks, and that's because Chris Carson is hurt, Carlos Hyde is hurt, Travis Homer is hurt. Now, we don't know kind of what's going to happen throughout the week with these injury situations, but DJ Dallas is a running back out of Miami who is fairly productive. He's a pretty good running back. He can catch the ball to the backfield, and he did see some snaps in this game against the Cardinals. And so depending on what happens this week, he may be a feature back for this offense. And while he may not be running the ball too much, he's going to be able to catch passes out of the backfield because he was actually a converted wide receiver. So he can catch passes really well. He can run good routes. And so he can be used in this offense quite a bit if those running backs ahead of him are all down with injury. And I fully expect him to be used because he's a talented running back and he can get it done. So that's one guy, if you're in a redraft league or even in a dynasty league, look out for him on waivers, potentially pick him up because he could be a deep stash right now that could be very valuable going forward in fantasy. And the other guy I wanted to touch on is Hollywood Higgins, Rashard Higgins, and Donovan Peoples-Jones, the rookie wide receiver out of Michigan. First, Rashard Higgins had a great game once Odell Beckham got hurt. I believe he had 7 receptions for over 100 yards. And Higgins has always been a guy who got it done. And for some reason, he's always had chemistry with Baker Mayfield. Even when Baker Mayfield was a rookie, Higgins was someone that he really looked to, that he developed chemistry with pretty early on, it seemed. And for whatever reason, they haven't really found ways to use Higgins, whether that's because OBJ is complaining about his targets and they need to get Jarvis targets and Kareem Hunt gets targets. But when Higgins actually has that target share and has that opportunity, he performs really well. So he's a guy that you can potentially target for down the stretch. We know that OBJ is not coming back for the rest of this season, unfortunately, with this torn ACL. And so Higgins is a guy that could be a viable fantasy option as just kind of a flex play to fill in some bye weeks, and probably wouldn't be all that expensive for you to acquire, maybe a 3rd round pick, maybe even a 4th round pick if you're lucky, for a guy who just wants to kind of cash in on that value. I think he's a great target along with Austin Hooper, who's going to be coming off of injury. He won't be back for a few weeks, but he's another favorite target of Baker, especially with OBJ gone. We may see more spreading of the ball. Now, the last guy, like I mentioned earlier, the rookie wide receiver out of Michigan, Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's actually the one who caught the game-winning touchdown in that game against the Bengals. But one thing to know about Jones is that he's just an athletic freak. He's a player who went to Michigan. They played with a terrible quarterback, so he didn't get a whole lot of respect as far as his yardage. He didn't see a whole lot of receptions just because they had really bad quarterback play. But now he's playing with a much better quarterback, a much improved offense, one that can really thrive in play action. The best thing about DPJ is he's just kind of a size speed freak. He can really go up and catch the ball. He's extremely tall. He's extremely fast. He can leap. He's got the whole package. He just never really put it together in college, and that's why we didn't see him go as highly drafted as he could have been. He's just a very raw prospect, but you look at someone like Chase Claypool, who is just a size speed freak, be able to do things on offense. DPJ is kind of like a light version of that. He jumped over 40 inches. He had a over 10-foot broad jump. I believe he ran under 4.5, and he's like 6'4", 215 pounds. So he's just an extremely athletic player, and is a player that will probably get involved in subsequent weeks down the stretch, and could be a guy you want to look for as a potential league winner this year. As someone who just can maybe take strides as a rookie down the stretch. We've already seen a lot of these rookies perform extremely well, and DPJ could be the next one up of these rookie wide receivers with OBJ going out. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. You can check out more of my work on Destination Devy on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at your boy Jay Rich. I post a few different things here there for fantasy, give you some updates, some stats that I find. So please follow me if you like my content. Subscribe to Mayo Media Network. Drop this video a like and give me a comment below who some of your favorite buys are in Dynasty halfway through the season. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys next week.